Movement, prep, and screen. So what I want to do is take a minute here and talk about what you can do for yourself, or what you should be looking for a coach or an organization to do for you, or as a coach, what you can be doing for your athletes. And that begins with understanding movement and prepping your athletes for good movement, and simple screens too. So what I use for most of my athletes is called the Functional Movement Screen by Gray Cook and Lee Burton. It's a great screen utilized by the NFL Combine, NBA Combine, NHL, lots of major universities. Everyone knows about it. Now, you don't have to do that screen, and what I'm going to go over here is just some of the simple deficiencies that we see in asymmetries. And a lot of times what I use that screen for is to kind of get my athletes to understand and buy into it and see those deficiencies. But I can see it in a lot of simple movements they're doing. A lot of times what I like to do is look at an A-skip, so an A-skip here as they're moving down. I get to see postural deficiencies. I get to see hip flexion and extension, external rotation with feet. Some of the other things that we'll talk about here in a second, I get to see all of those. It's happening faster, but I can see those deficiencies and those things they're doing wrong, and then I know that's not making them efficient, and that could lead to an injury. So the reason we want to clean all this stuff up here is those exact reasons of, I want my athlete to be powerful, and to be powerful, we have to be efficient with our force in and out of the ground. That means everything's got to be moving mechanically correct. We also don't want to injure our athletes or yourself, right? You want to stay on the field or on the court or on the track. So we need to look at these things, because the number one job of sports performance training or improving what you're doing is don't injure, don't get yourself hurt, don't injure yourself, and to improve yourself. So those two things, that's the role of sports performance. So a couple things. I'm just going to go over a few things and screens, and a lot of the drills that we do and that we're going to show you and that are in our other videos are to focus on some of these deficiencies, some of the asymmetries where maybe there's different movements on one side and the other side's not as good, or things that could put us at risk for injury. So I'm just going to start at the bottom and work up fairly quickly, and we can dive deeper in later in some of those exercises and talk about, hey, this exercise is working that. So when we start with the feet, we really don't want to be, some people call these duck feet, it's externally rotated. This is not efficient. When we sprint, we want everything to be moving backwards, so we're pushing backwards to go forwards. So if we go out here, that's not going to be an efficient foot strike. It's also going to put us at risk for, okay, if we externally rotate, and now if we pronate, so our foot rolls in, I am in a terrible position for my knee. It's just going to take a little torque and torsion to move me from doing sports performance to going to do physical therapy or possibly having surgery. So we don't want to externally rotate. We don't want to roll in. That weakness usually comes from the hips. And so we have drills working on the glute med, strengthening the hips. So toe pointed forward, not externally rotating, and trying not to pronate. And that starts with getting good shoes and good arch supports or whatever it is that your foot does, that if it rolls in too much or if it's too high, making sure you have the right support, because your feet are the only thing that touches the ground trying to put that force in and out of the ground. So we don't really want to externally rotate. We don't want to pronate. We want everything forward. When we go up to the knees, a lot of things that we'll see is this valgus collapse. Again, that's weak hips, and that puts us at risk for injury. So if that's on a jump, a cut, a sprint, so you can look at that and you can see that in a lot of our jumping drills. We're going to talk about that, and I put bands around knees a lot to give an external cue to pull our knees out. We don't want to go too far out, but we just want to be knees over toes. So when we go to the hips here, a lot of times we may have tight hips or we don't get into that neutral position that we talk about. So we got to make sure that we're getting a hip flexor and a hamstring that are the length they're supposed to be when you start. They're not too short or not too long. So if I rotate anteriorly, rotate forward, I've shortened my hip flexors and lengthened my hamstrings. That's not where I want to start. I want to start neutral with all my muscles so they're ready to go. So sometimes that can be tight, so we may need to do some stretching or some foam rolling or some other myofascial stuff. And that's why we have our warm-up and some of the other drills within our coaching, that we're working on all the muscles to prepare them for what we need to do. So we look at the hips. Another thing now, if we get into a sprint, kind of like a hurdle step here, if we get into that sprint stride, you can notice if I externally rotate, that comes from maybe where I was standing. So I want to be up, trying to be able to get my hip up, this flexion here, my knee almost to parallel, because that's going to be where I am when I sprint. My toe pointed forward, my toe up, and be able to do that now all in a good posture position, not here, but neutral, abs are tight, flat in front, driving my knee up. So as we go from there, the hips, there's lots of weaknesses we can look at. One more thing that we can talk about the hips. The hips get blamed for a lot of things that the ankles sometimes do. I kind of skipped over one. I'm going to go back here. Is the ankle mobility of being able to have a nice, good dorsiflexion here. If we don't have that, that will mess up our squats, our single leg exercises, a lot of things. And so we'll talk about that in some of the static stretching we do in our warm-up to really increase that mobility. So as I go up, we talk about hips and being in a neutral position, the core being strong and flat. And then as you go to the shoulders, there's things we're looking at like external rotation. Can I get into that position without arching my back? Because if I do that, now I'm putting weight over my head and I got arching back, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on my spine there. So those are the simple things that we want to look at. There's a lot more you can look at, but being able to look at yourself, if it's on video and screen it, have someone else look at it, you can look for some of those, especially the lower body deficiencies that we talk about, because that's going to take away some of the power that you're trying to get. So just being honest with yourself, looking at what am I deficient with, and then what drills can I do to help become more efficient and more powerful, that's going to be where you start to become a better athlete.